Here we are again. Another insane, crazy fun, and different variation of the Bash Barbarian. If you're a basher like me, you've seen so many variations of this build. This one is definitely set up differently than my last couple, but it feels just as strong. It hits really hard, but instead of swinging around a big old two-handed mace, we're going to dual wield for this one. The questions I get asked a lot: can this clear tormented bosses? Yes. Can it clear Uber Lilith? Yes. Can it clear high levels into the pit? Also yes. And these are just a couple of things that this variation could do. My gear is still a massive work in progress. I have pieces with 0 greater affixes, the wrong master working on my 25%, and it's still putting up some big numbers and high pit runs. I have a speed run through a tier 90 pit to show you the damage it puts out, and I'll have a link in the description below to a tier 110 run without any holy bolts. If you want to see how it performs at a high level, check it out. Before we break down the build guide, let's check out the pit run, and if you find this video helpful, consider subscribing. Even if you don't want to do that, share the video with your friends so we can get the best version of Bash out there. I'm 100% open on feedback for what you think of the build, what we can improve on it. Let me know what you think. Here's the run. Go. That is the run. That's a quick, just about 2.5 minutes. Let's hop into the training grounds and check out the build. Let's take a look at this skill tree. We're going to be starting with Bash. This is our main damage dealer. We're going to be maxing this out. Then we're going to be taking Enhanced Bash. This will generate a ton of Fortify. For this variation, we're not going to be running a two-handed weapon, but that's okay because we're going to attack so fast that your Fortify is going to go through the roof anyway. We're not taking any points in any core skills. We're going to be doing 3 points in Imposing Presence to gain some extra life. Martial Vigor for some extra damage reduction. We're going to be going in a Rallying Cry all the way down through Strategic Rallying Cry. This one may not actually be necessary because we're going to be getting so much Fortify from Bash, but for now we're going to leave it on and I'm going to continue doing testing. We're doing 1 point into Iron Skin, and then we're going to move all the way down through Tactical Iron Skin. This is going to be a really big part of this build, because not only is Iron Skin going to give us a barrier, it's also going to give us damage reduction, and it's going to give us Unstoppable with 25% increased damage. But that's for later. We'll get to the video of how that's going to give us some damage from a defensive ability. 1 point into Outburst, that will give us some Thorns, and then we're going to do Tough as Nails. Increase your Thorns by 30%. When enemies hit you, they take additional 10% of your Thorns as Bleed. We're going to be using Bleed to activate our Blood Rage node. We're going to be taking Challenging Shout, and we're going to go down through Enhanced Challenging Shout to gain that extra 20% life. We're going to be doing Swiftness. Movement speed is life, especially when you're trying to dodge bosses. You want to have enough movement speed to be able to move out of whatever they're putting underneath your feet. If you don't, it is pretty much a one-shot when you start pushing into the high levels of the pit. So make sure you have enough movement speed. I'm running about 145% on this build, and that is actually very slow. When I do my Lilith fights, I switch out some gear so that I have at least 173%. You want to have a lot of movement speed. We're going to be doing a War Cry. Just because when you get into the high levels of the pit, you're going to have a lot of really, really tanky monsters. We're going to be taking Power War Cry. This will not affect the bosses, because at least 6 enemies have to be nearby you so that you gain that extra damage. When you're pushing high levels of the pit, sometimes those elite packs get really tanky. So this is going to help there to get through it and get to the boss faster. 3 points in Booming Voice to make sure that we have more uptime on all 3 of our shouts. We're going to be doing 3 points into Aggressive Resistance. You gain 12% damage reduction while berserking. We're going to be getting berserking from a couple different sources, so we're going to have this damage reduction up quite often. 3 points into Pit Fighter, 9% increased damage close, and you get a little bit of damage reduction from distant enemies, which is really, really nice to have. Slaying Strikes. And we're building this around pushing high into the pit, because when you get into the pit and everything starts to get a little low, especially bosses, because when they get to that very end phase, when they're below injured state, which is 35%, everything starts to spawn faster. They start to hit harder. More echoes are spawning. So you want to be able to get that little bit of increase to get a little bit more damage out to kill it a little faster. We're going to be going down to Steel Grasp. With Steel Grasp, we're going to go all the way through Fighter's Steel Grasp. This is where we're going to get most of our berserking from. You also are going to gain it from Warcry, but this is really going to be the main source, because we're going to be using Steel Grasp as often as we can whenever it comes off of cooldown. Steel Grasp is also going to be our main source of vulnerable. But we want to be spamming this as soon as it's up. You're going to be wanting to use it strategically, of course. 1 point into Thick Skin for some additional fortify while we get hit. Then we're going to go in 3 points into Counteroffensive. Whenever we're over 50% of our maximum life for fortify, we gain 12% increased damage. Great source of damage here, because we're always going to be fortified. We're taking 3 points into Duelist. 9% increased attack speed while using a one-handed weapon. We're going to be using our dual wield weapons, so we're going to be gaining an additional 9% here. This is really great because dual wield weapons attack very fast. We have a lot of attack speed on our gear. We're going to be running multiple different sources of attack speed increases. It's really fun to see how fast you attack. We went into Wallop here. Using a bludgeoning weapon deals 15% increased damage if the enemies are stunned or vulnerable. So we're going to have stun up almost 100% of the time, and we're going to have vulnerable out all the time. We're going to be using a one-handed mace, so we're going to get that effect as we're attacking. Put 3 points into concussion here. This could actually go down to 2 if you want to, and you put some more points into max fury if you feel like you're doing not enough damage and you want to pump out a little bit more. The only reason I have 3 points into here is because I want to get that stun chance up as high as I possibly can. With a two-handed mace, you actually have a 100% chance to stun here, but with a one-handed weapon, which is what we're going to be using, we only have a 70% chance. So if we take those 2 points and we put it back into here, we go up to 90%. That's pretty good. I don't think we really need anything more than that, because of how often we're going to be attacking. You're going to get that to proc. Even at 70% with it here, you're still going to be fine. So I'm going to leave this in there for now. We're going to go 1 point into Constrained. This increases Berserking's maximum duration by 5 seconds, which is really, really helpful. It increases the damage bonus to 100%. If you read below where the refund cost is, Berserking grants 25% increased damage and 15% movement speed. This effect lasts up to 5 seconds. That 25% that it grants actually goes from 25% up to 100% damage, and it's a multiplier. So this is a really, really great source of damage, because we're not going to be using any core skills. So Unbridled Rage would not be any benefit to us right here. Let's take a look at the Paragon board. This board was put together by someone from my clan. I reworked a little bit to make it fit for this, because it was originally put together for a different build, but it fit this really, really well. So I moved some glyphs around, moved some nodes around just to make sure that it would fit into this build. So let's go over it with you. I didn't take everything into max life. If you want to go with a max life build, there's a ways to move this around. But for this build, we didn't go all the way into max life. We started with exploit here for a little bit of additional damage and vulnerable damage. Moving up, we came into the Blood Rage node. We'll talk about Blood Rage in just a second. We went into Ire in this board. Ire grants additional damage while berserking, and while you're berserking, you take 10% reduced damage from elites. Now, the Blood Rage node, this was changed. In Season 3, you were able to scale this up infinitely. You could get as much current bonus as possible, so your damage was scaled so high. They changed that to only max out at 30%. This is where you're going to have to choose how you want to build your character. If you have Tempering that has damage while berserking on it, you can remove some of your nodes like this here to get rid of some of that damage while berserking bonus and put them into different spots. If you need the duration, then you can do that. But if we have enough cooldown and enough attack speed with Hectic, we don't really need it because we'll be able to Steel Grasp enough to keep berserking up. The third board, we're going to go over to the right here. This board is going to be your Warbringer board. If you saw in the skill tree, we're going to get a ton of Fortify from our skills. We don't need to take this legendary node, and we're also not going to be spending any Fury. We're only going to be generating Fury. In this board, we're going with Crusher here. Some extra damage with maces, and while wielding a mace, you deal 20% increased overpower damage. With this build, I've hit up to about 250 million per overpower crit. Is about the maximum I've seen. Not quite as high as two-handed maces, but it definitely works. Because of one of the weapons that we're going to be using, we're going to need every single max Fury node that we possibly can get, which is why I pathed down into these nodes here for your next board. And we're bouncing around a little bit because your rare nodes, making sure that we have these unlocked, depends on the order that you put the boards in. So follow along on the planner with the numbers that are in the top corner for which way you're going to be putting the boards in. We're going to be coming up into your Bonebreaker node. This is going to give us guaranteed overpower every 12 seconds. In this board, we're going to be running Blood Feeder. This is going to give us extra damage to bleeding, and we're going to be causing enemies to bleed through Tough as Nails in the skill tree. For your fifth board, we have to go all the way back down here. So again, follow along with the planner. We're going to be running into the Carnage node. For the amount of attack speed that we're going to be running, this node is really far pathing to get to, so I left it off. I don't think that we're going to be missing out on any attack speed at all. We're going to be running Martial Glyph in this. This is going to help reduce the cooldown of our Iron Skin and our Steel Grasp. Every time that we use a shout, it's going to reduce those by 2 seconds. So you don't want to be spamming all of your shouts at one time. You can use those in case of an emergency to help cool down Iron Skin, which is going to be your lifesaver. Your sixth board, we're going to be going straight up here. So we go up, we're going to be going into Flawless Technique. In this board, we're going to be running Ambidextrous. This will give us extra damage reduction and extra critical strike damage with a one-handed weapon because it's going to give us 125% increase. This is why we put it into this board here. As you can see, we're gaining, all of these rare nodes are getting that extra little boost. From this board, we use this to path over to get our Bonebreaker legendary node. This was much faster than having to path all the way up through here. So we took these in order to get to this in the least amount of nodes that we're taking. For your final board, we're coming over to the very top. I'll show you with the pathing from the starter board straight up here and then over. We're going to be going into the Decimator node. Each time you make an enemy vulnerable, your damage is increased by 10% for 5 seconds. Overpowering a vulnerable enemy grants an additional 10% X bonus for 5 seconds. This means every 12 seconds we're going to be doing 20% increased damage, which is actually pretty big. In this board, we're going to be running Undaunted. This will give us some extra damage reduction while fortified, and fortified gives us a lot as it is, a whole 15%. So we're going to have 25% damage reduction while fortified, and it's going to give us more damage while we're fortified. That's Paragon Board. Now we're going to go take a look at the aspects. I'm going to break down all of the aspects, all of the affixes, as well as the tempering. We're going to start off a little bit differently this time. I'm going to start with the weapon that we're going to be building this whole thing around. The Ramalama Ding Dong, the Magnum Opus. We're going to be building our build around this. The reason that we're going to be building around this, skills using this weapon deal 0.4% increased damage per point of fury that you have. You lose 2 fury every second. We don't have to worry about that. Because we're using a basic skill, it's a fury generator. So we're always going to be running full fury. So that we're always gaining that extra damage from this. For this build, you want to be running max fury. So when we went over the Paragon board, when I said that we took all of those max fury nodes, this was the reason that we took those nodes. The more fury that you have, the more damage that this weapon generates for you. And because we're going to be using dual wield for Bash, Bash is going to get all of the benefit of this. So let's break it down for a second. I'm running 190 Fury here. If I gain 0.4% of that 190, that gives me 76% increased damage just from using this weapon. You also have the option of running your Resourcefulness Elixir. This will buff me up to 215%, which gives me an 86% increase to damage just by using this one weapon. Now, as I go back through the rest of the gear, we'll have some other options of where you can put more Max Fury if this is really what you want to do, because you want to scale up the damage from this weapon. I got one temper to roll on my Max Fury line, so if I could get more tempers to roll or get a greater affix on this, it's just going to boost your damage up and up and up and up. Okay, let's hop back into the rest of it. We're going to start with the helmet. Now, with this helmet here, we have a couple different options. I'm running Strength Max Life Armor. Ideally, I probably would want to move the armor around to my boots and then run something like cooldown reduction, or because we're running Hectic, we get a lot of cooldown, a really great option for this would be Maximum Resource. This will give us additional Max Fury, which will increase our damage. So that is also an option for you if you wanted to do it. For the aspect, we're going to be running Iron Warrior. Iron Skin grants up to 35% damage reduction, which is a huge source from just one aspect. And it makes you unstoppable, which is a really, really good failsafe for if you get hit by something, you're stunned, slowed, you need to move out of a boss mechanic. For my tempering, I went with a resistance, and then I also went with concussion. I'm going to have 2 pieces of armor with +3 concussion. That'll get us to our 90% chance to stun when we're using our bludgeoning weapons. For the chest piece, we're going to be running Strength, Max Life, Iron Skin ranks. The ranks to Iron Skin will help reduce the cooldown and increase the barrier generated by Iron Skin. For our tempers, we're going to be running Iron Skin and barrier generation to enhance that barrier that Iron Skin gives us, because we want it to be up as long as possible for a couple different reasons that we're going to get to when we get over to our jewelry. In an ideal world, I would probably want to replace my strength with my resistance to all, and I'll talk about that when we get to the pants and why. But I haven't been able to get the rolls that I wanted yet. But I'm going to have it in the planner with the optimal rolls that I would like to have for this build to make it run correctly. These are what I have on right now. So once we get to the pants, I'll go over why. And for the aspect, we're going to be running Undying here. Because our attack speed is so high and we attack so quickly, I notice a huge difference in my life generation. Even running from pack to pack and using Bash in between, my life would shoot back up. So this is really, really great with a dual wield setup. I didn't see some increase with a two-handed weapon setup, but it wasn't quite as much and it wasn't as significant. So this is actually really, really great for this setup. For the gloves, we're running Pain Gorgers. If you can get your master working to hit your critical strike chance and your attack speed, you're golden with Pain Gorgers. That 30% that I'm missing actually makes a pretty big difference. I tested with a pair of 200% gloves, and I did see a difference, but it wasn't significant enough to not give up the greater affixes and the perfect crit chance. So I did take a little bit of damage off the top to make sure that I had enough of the stats that I needed to make this build run. On your pants, this is where I have my resistance to all. In a perfect world, I would like this resistance all to become ranks to Bash. If I can get ranks to Bash here, that makes up for losing the strength on the chest piece and replacing that with resistance to all. This hasn't worked out for me yet, and I haven't been able to switch it around. So if you can get this, this will be the optimal setup for the build. Follow along the planner. I'm going to go over what we're doing in the video, but the planner is going to be what I would like to have versus what I have in this video. For the aspect here, we're going to be running Might. This gives us 20% damage reduction just by swinging in the air. So if you're running from monster to monster or pack to pack, in order to keep this damage reduction up, all you have to do is cast Bash once, and this procs for 7 seconds. So that means when you run into a group of monsters, you have 20% additional damage reduction up, and you don't have to worry about proccing it after the monsters start hitting you. For our boots here, this is where I actually would have liked to move my armor to. Get rid of the ranks of Warcry. It is beneficial having the Mayor, but I would like to have armor so that I can get the cooldown reduction or the Max Fury here. So we put armor on the boots in place of the Warcry ranks, and you keep the strength and the maximum life. For your tempering, we're going to be running more barrier generation to increase that barrier from Iron Skin to keep it up longer. And we're going to be running movement speed because movement speed is life here. If you find yourself feeling a little bit too slow and you want to replace either the max life or the strength with additional movement speed, you can do that. This is just the setup that I like to do just for running the pits. Moving down to our two-handed bludgeoning weapon. This is going to be pretty much the same across the board. I haven't used the rogue tempering critical strike here, so I've just been running what was given to us for the barbarians. I'm running strength, max life, critical strike damage. This will be the same for all three of the weapons that we're going to be using. For tempering, we're going to be doing damage while berserking and then bash cleaves for percent damage. This is where all of your damage from bash is going to be coming from. These are incredibly important. If you can get your masterworking 25% to hit on these, that is the absolute biggest increase to damage that you're going to see. I have not been that lucky. This was the only one that I've gotten here. So my other ones don't have that. As you can see, I'm trying to re-roll them in the process right now. I just haven't had that luck, but it's coming. It's a grind. It's not a sprint. For the aspect here, we're running Moonrise. Moonrise, damaging an enemy with a basic skill, which is what we're using because we use Bash, grants you 4% increased attack speed for 10 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. When you reach that maximum stack, you enter Vampiric Blood Rage, gaining 160% increased skill damage to your basic attack, which is what we're going to be using, and 15% movement speed. So every 5 stacks, we're going to gain an additional 15% movement speed, so you really feel your movement speed going through the roof. So you're going to have a lot going on to your bludgeoning weapons. So remember, we have to be running a one-handed base for this build, or else we can't use Bash with dual wield. The affix lines are going to be the same: strength, max life, critical strike damage, damage while berserking, and we're going to be running Bash cleaves for damage. For the aspect here, we're going to be running Edge Masters, 20% increased damage based on your primary resource available when cast. We spend 0 Fury. So we're always going to be at max, so you're always going to get this 20% increased damage. Because I had to swap out a weapon for my Magnum Opus, this weapon I actually probably could roll damage to close instead of the damage while berserking, because I put the damage while berserking on both of my two-handed weapons because I needed to hit that 30%. With that being on both weapons, I probably am over the cap, so I would have to tinker with a little bit, but you don't really need to. Either way, it's going to be additive damage, and it's not going to be a huge percent. So if you end up with damage while berserking on 3 weapons or on 2 weapons, just make sure you hit that 30% on the Blood Rage node, and you'll be good to go. For your slashing two-handed weapon, strength, max life, critical strike damage, this is your end-all be-all for what you're going to be wanting to run. And then again, I have damage while berserking to make sure I hit that node. We have your bash cleaves for damage. For my aspect, I'm running intercom. I put this on the two-handed weapon because a lot of the time we end up standing still when we're fighting bosses, waiting for a mechanic to go off. This gives additional 60% multiplicative damage if we're standing still for 3 seconds. And even if we're not, it's just as good as Edge Masters because we're gaining a 20% X damage. In the previous variant, we were running Rapid here because we needed the increased attack speed, but with the dual wield weapons, you don't need that. So I was able to move that off here and give us some more damage here for the ring. I don't really want to have the damage on here. That was just the roll that I ended up with. This would be something like critical strike damage here. Or if you want to make yourself a lot more tanky, you run maximum life. It's also a really, really good option. You do want to have critical strike chance and attack speed for this build. You want to be critically hitting as much as possible. I was really happy that I got these 2 masterworking rolls on here, and with the amount of critical strike chance that I've gotten, I'm running 73.8% critical strike chance. The amount of times that we crit is through the roof, and it really, really benefits DPS because you want to be critting as much as possible. With the gear and the masterworking that I have, I've been able to get myself up to 73.4% critical strike chance. And that could have been higher if I had gotten different masterworking rolls, but I'm really happy with where it's at right now because we're getting plenty of critical strike chances here. For the aspect, we're going to be running Conceited. This gives us a 25% increased damage while we have a barrier. We're going to be getting our barrier from Iron Skin. This is why it's so important to have all the barrier generation to give us additional barrier and all the cooldown reduction and ranks to Iron Skin. The more we have this barrier up, the more damage we do. For the tempering here, we ran Steel Grasp cooldown reduction because we're going to be spamming Steel Grasp as much as possible. Remember, it's our source of berserking, and it also grants vulnerable damage. So I have damage on this ring. What I want to be running is damage to close. So as soon as I'm done with this video, I'm going to re-roll because I'm sure that you guys don't want to watch me re-roll items. You all know how that goes. And try and get myself that damage to close instead of the straight damage. It's an additive number, so damage to close will be more additive to your damage bucket. That's your optimal source right there. For the next ring, we're going to be running the same thing: attack speed, critical strike chance, critical strike damage. Now, if this is, again, something you want to make tanky, you replace critical strike damage with life. Then you're going to start scaling up to sometimes around 70, 80, 90,000 life if you put life on everything that you have. This is the optimal setup that I wanted for the rings. We have perfect Steel Grasp cooldown and perfect damage to close. For the aspect, we're going to be running Rapid. I took it off of the two-hander from the last variant that we have, and I put it onto the ring. This pushes our attack speed just over to where we want it to be at. For the amulet, we're running attack speed, critical strike chance, and cooldown reduction. I would highly suggest keeping the attack speed and the critical strike chance. If you wanted to roll max life instead of cooldown reduction, you can do that too. Just stack that life, then with the Iron Skin barrier, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger the more life that you have. I finished off my resistances by putting shadow here, and then I added a little bit of movement speed because I don't want to be too slow and not be able to get out of the mechanics that the bosses are dropping underneath my feet. For the aspect, we're running adaptability. The only part of this aspect that we really are going to focus on is the bottom part. When cast at or above 50% maximum resources, basic skills deal 120% increased damage. Because we're running Bash, which is a basic skill, and a generator, we're always going to be over that 50%. This is a really, really big increase to our Bash damage. So if we look at what we're going to be stacking, we're going to be stacking 120% damage here to basic skills. We have 160% damage to basic skills here. We have up to 200% damage to basic skills here. 400% bash damage here. We have 120% bash damage here. We have 273% bash damage here. If you add all that up together, bash hits so hard, and this is where the source of our damage really comes from. So make sure you try and get your masterworking on your weapon to hit those bash cleave damage increases, because that will be your biggest source of damage to bash. And last but not least, because I haven't put this in every single video and I want to make sure we cover it because people have asked, is our expertise. We're going to be running two-handed axe expertise because this will give us 10% X increased damage to vulnerable enemies. This is going to be the best option out of all of them. For your expertise and how these work, you do not have to be using a two-handed axe to gain the benefit of this. This is why this is your class skill. You can still use a two-handed sword and still gain the benefits of using a two-handed axe. So always select this one. This is pretty much going to be your only option for every build because this one is the best in terms of increasing your damage. That is a full breakdown of the build. I'm going to do a quick gameplay loop so you guys can see what this looks like. So I'll see you back in the training grounds. Gameplay loop, and I'm going to share a couple tips here for you guys. If you have access to a controller, this is really, really broken on the controller. I don't know why the interaction is different. Maybe somebody out there can figure out how to do it on a mouse and keyboard. When you're standing still, if you hit a force move button, force move, and then you hit your shift key and you use bash, you can attack the air. And even if I spam bash, because I'm clicking my mouse as fast as I can, this is how fast I move across the screen. And I have to spam the button. I can't hold it. If I hold it, I just move. With the controller, if you hold the bash key, you can fly across the map and you attack as fast as you can. So this is actually really, really helpful when you're moving from pack to pack because you can work on something like your cooldowns. If you watch the cooldown of Warcry, every 5 attacks, it jumps down in cooldown because we're activating Hectic. We're also activating your damage reduction from Might. So as we're going through, and every time we attack, Might stays up, and then we're also gaining 5 basic skills give you your cooldown. Okay, we're not getting the benefit from standing still from intercom, but that's okay because as we move from pack to pack, we're cooling down our skills, we're keeping up our 20% damage reduction. It is really, really awesome, honestly. So if you have access to a controller, you can hook up your controller to your PC. I have a controller here and I have a mouse. So you can hook that up and then you can use this. It takes a little while to get used to, but if you move from place to place, it is a huge benefit to it. If you don't want to do that, mouse keyboard works just fine. So let's go over your gameplay. For this one, it's going to be a little bit different because we're not going to have Hoda in the variation here. So it actually simplified things down pretty much. So all you're going to really worry about is getting your Steel Grasp out first and hitting everything. With Steel Grasp, you want to look for this little symbol above the head here. This means that your Pain Forgers has activated. If I attack with Bash, it only hits one target unless the other one is close enough. So if I'm just out of range, I'm only going to hit one target. But if I'm close, Bash does cleave, so it'll hit 2. With Pain Gorgers, when Pain Gorgers hits, that little mark and that little symbol above their head, anybody that is marked, and we'll read it here, damaging the enemy with a non-basic skill, which is going to be your Steel Grasp, because that's not a basic skill, marks an enemy for 3 seconds. When a basic skill first hits a marked enemy, that basic skill's damage is echoed to all of the marked enemies, which means that every single one of them that has a mark above them will take the same amount of damage or something similar to the damage that you have done to that target. It takes all of your damage and spreads it out, and everybody gets hit. Your AoE potential becomes huge, and you also gain that 170% increased damage. So let me show you what it looks like. I'm just going to run a couple rotations through. We're going to use Steel Grasp to mark. We're going to pop Warcry, and then we're just going to start bashing. Remember, when we're using Iron Skin, we're gaining an additional 25%, but I don't have any way to pop Iron Skin because Iron Skin can only be activated when you've taken damage. So in the training grounds, I can't activate this, but if you go in and you watch the runs and you watch when I pop Iron Skin, the damage like shoots up. You can notice a very, very noticeable spike. But even without this, you're going to see some pretty big numbers. So let's run right through a really, really quick rotation here. So you're going to Steel Grasp, Warcry, and then you just start attacking. When the symbol falls off, you do it again, and then you start going again. So you saw 190 million, we're seeing 60 to 70 million, just regular normal crits. It's really, really, really a great build. And you see how fast we're attacking? So this is activating Undying. Every single time that we're casting one of these skills, we're activating Undying, which is healing us very, very, very quickly when they start taking damage. I found myself in a couple places where I actually couldn't even get Iron Skin off because I was healing myself so much, and I was spamming Iron Skin to try and get it for a little extra damage, and I couldn't do it. So Undying works really, really well. So that's the build. That's a breakdown of how it works. This build is really fun. You attack really, really fast. It's very tanky with the use of Iron Skin and Challenging Shout, because this is different from the previous variant. We didn't run this. Get into the pits, try it out, see what it feels like when you're in there hitting it. Let me know in the comments if there's something that you think that we can do differently, some way that we can improve the build. If you really like it, I would love to hear from everybody. I'll be live on YouTube and Twitch just about every night. Stop by, check it out, talk to me. Let's brainstorm together.